Hello and welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I founded Oxford Clay, an eco-conscious pottery company. So on this podcast, we're going to be talking about all things pottery related, often with an eco-conscious twist, and I can't wait to share it with you. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine and today we're going to be talking about 3 barriers potters face when sort of trying to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice. It's not easy, so we'll sort of talk about the 3 areas that can be quite tricky, and then what potters can do about it really. Okay, so the first barrier I would say, not just for potters, but like in everyone in all parts of their life, is just that idea that it doesn't matter, what you do at the individual level. And sort of there's this idea, you think, oh, well, what I'm doing is so small, I'm not going to make a difference. And that is an attitude, that is a kind of like a way of thinking basically. But what I would say to that is that the actions of every single individual, no matter how big or small, make a difference. If you're thinking about like collective action, just tiny actions taken by a huge number of people are going to have like an incredible impact. So I think there is that idea, you think it's just me on my own, what's the point? But actually, just think of like how, like, the force of loads of people doing the same action. And there's a book I read recently actually called The Self-Delusion by an author called Tom Oliver, and it was a really interesting book because it was basically saying that the idea of being an individual is actually a myth, and that actually all people are connected intrinsically to their environment and also to each other, and also to like this whole host of kind of other things like microorganisms and stuff. So we think that we're like an individual, but we're actually always operating as part of like a kind of collective kind of entity. So if you think of yourself like less as an individual, more as like a part of like a system, then you can have an impact. So that's one thing I'd say, that kind of like fatalism, whatever, like it's easy to think that, but yes, everyone does make a difference, and it is worth, any action, no matter how small, does make a difference. Okay, so the second barrier that potters face is really just like not knowing how to make their practice more eco-conscious, what things are going to have an impact, even where to start, even trying to find out more about pottery materials. I have found all of those barriers to kind of trying to make the changes. So first of all, trying to understand like the impact of the materials I was using, but also like in terms of like what I could actually do about it in the future. So like tools, techniques, so it can often feel kind of overwhelming, just thinking I don't know enough to even know what to do, sort of thing. So I've been there and I've spent a really long time researching eco-conscious pottery and different materials in the pottery industry, different techniques, different tools, different ways of doing things. I've basically spent years doing research on this, and it was tricky, but I just really didn't want other potters to have to go through the same kind of starting at the very beginning sort of part of the process that I did. So I've put everything I know into some ebooks and courses as well. So they're all on the Oxford Clay website. So if you're interested in just thinking like, oh, I don't know where to start, I really don't know what to do, I don't know anything about the materials I'm using, then eco-friendly pottery. So that's got 30 simple ways. That book, it's I've got 30 simple ways of making, pottery practice more eco-friendly, basically. And it just goes through like the different aspects of pottery and just some kind of real quick wins in terms of like what you can do, to have a big impact, basically, on, making your pottery more eco-conscious. And then, if you kind of really diving into the detail of like glazing materials and you think, just got a sneaking suspicion that the glaze I'm using, I don't know where it comes from. I don't know, how ethical it is. I don't know where the ingredients, like what the ingredients are. So like, if you're interested more in sort of glazing, then there's another book called Eco-Conscious Pottery Glazing, which is like, it goes into detail of every single kind of glaze making material that potters will use. And, also like how to a really good way of like understanding the environmental and social impact of a pottery material that you might be using, sort of how to use data that's out there to make decisions about which pottery material to use. But it's also got like a lot of that data is already in that book. So if you're thinking like, oh, I just need to know, like, should I be using cobalt or not? Should I be using copper oxide or not? It's got the information in there, and you can make that decision for yourself about like, whether you want to use that pottery material, in your pottery. So, so those materials, like, hopefully, they could sort of be part of, like the picture in terms of like learning more about like the pottery materials and different practices and where materials even come from. But there's loads of other resources actually out there, and these are some of the resources that I used when I was like actually researching pottery materials. So there's a really good website called digitalfire.com, and digitalfire.com basically is a really fantastic description of every single kind of pottery material, basically. And it's incredible. It basically lists out every single pottery material and kind of like the kind of chemical structure of it, and also it's just all about it, really. Like, if you're thinking, I don't even know what this pottery material is, I would say digitalfire.com is a great resource, because it basically just goes into like what the material is and what even it's made from. Oh, it's from a rock. Okay, great. So that's a really, really fantastic resource. Another resource are just general kind of like that I've used actually are just general kind of like journalistic articles on kind of mining and global supply chains and stuff. So for example, I read a really good article which was about kind of the artisanal mining sector, and just the fact that there's not really enough like data on sort of like health and safety and stuff like that. And that was just, so, you can sort of like if you can like you can Google your pottery material that you want to find out more about, and then it could come up in like searches in terms of like in the UK we have a newspaper called The Guardian. They've written quite a lot about like cobalt, for example. So yeah, there's lots of like journalistic resources out there for you to like research like different pottery materials. And another really good resource is sort of like global organisations like reports. So Amnesty International, basically, they've got some really fantastic information on, in particular, they do, sort of different mining industries, but in particular, they've got great resources on the cobalt mining industry in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and just, the kind of environmental and social harm that's, potentially causing in that area. And so they've got some great reports you can just download off their website and read all about that. So definitely recommend Amnesty International as a fantastic resource. They've done some very comprehensive research on cobalt mining in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. So okay, so let's go on to like the third barrier that potters can face, and I think this is probably the most difficult, and that is basically that, as a potter, it's like you've worked really hard. You've got a defined aesthetic, which you've worked really hard. It's like it's coming from your heart, your creative heart, and like you've spent years like honing your craft potentially, or you've just got an idea in your mind. You're trying to put it into practice, and this can be really difficult to kind of change your practice. So, for example, when I was actually when I first started like Oxford Clay, I didn't use any metal oxides at all. I was just colouring pottery naturally using plant ash glazes. And I used to have like quite a lot of people would say to me like, oh, this is nice, but can you make it in like blue, or can you make it in green? And at that time I hadn't worked out that actually I could make my own metal oxides from recycled metal. Which, if you're interested in that, there's a video course on the Oxford Clay website, and also actually it tells you how to do that in the Eco-Conscious Pottery Glazing book. If you're interested in making your own copper oxide and iron oxide, it tells you how to do that in that book. Essentially, like, I think it's quite tricky. You think like, I don't know, you can make one thing and you can have like, values maybe associated with it, but when it actually comes to making work that is like, that you also feel is like, really beautiful from your heart, or what you want to be making, those two things can kind of sometimes be opposing. Because you're trying to limit your use of certain materials and stuff. So I'd say that's quite tricky. And another aspect of that is you might have really established processes that you use. And so you think, well, I can't change these now. This is just the way I, make my stuff. And, I don't want to change like the way I'm making my pottery. And actually, I had a funny example of this. Like a sort of pottery group reached out to me, and they said, oh hi, we have like a monthly newsletter for our potters, and this was in a part of England, and they said, would you consider maybe writing like a part of our newsletter on like maybe eco-conscious pottery, things you can do as a potter. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. So I wrote, and then they wrote back and they said, oh, we think this is kind of maybe a bit like kind of too extreme for our members. Basically they're sort of saying that they thought, they basically said that their group of potters are very established in the ways that they work, and that they don't think they would be really like open to those ideas. And so they kind of asked me to like take some bits out, change some bits, and which I did, but like it just shows that actually once you've got a good making method, it is hard to change. And a lot of kind of, there's some pottery materials are kind of do kind of create an uncomfortable truth basically about the ways in which they're mined from the earth, and their impact on people, animals, and the environment. So this is down to like the individual person, isn't it? It's like about you're armed with the knowledge, in terms of like finding out how a pottery material, where it comes from, and then every potter can make their own choice basically about whether they want to use that in their work or not. So I would say like there are the resources out there, and like I said, if you want just some like easy to access resources, those two books are like that I wrote them basically to collect all the knowledge that I'd sort of found over like a long time kind of researching, just to make it as easy as possible to kind of like get that knowledge basically, and then you can make the informed decision from there. So so I hope you found that episode useful. I hope it hasn't been too like kind of depressing. That it was like it can be tricky, but nothing is insurmountable, and every individual can make a difference. So that's what we'll end on. Every individual's actions are important. So so really looking forward to seeing you on the next episode, and happy potting until then.